The sharp sting of fear burned through Adolfo Kaminsky's lungs as the militia patrol with red armbands stormed into the metro car on a spring morning in 1944. The doors slammed shut behind them. Nobody would leave until every passenger had been checked. The sergeant gestured toward the young man clutching a leather satchel, demanding papers. Adolfo calmly produced his documents. His real name was Jewish, but the papers in his hand told a different story. He knew they were flawless because he had created them himself. The militiaman held the identity card up to the light, searching for telltale signs of forgery: smudged ink, inconsistent watermarks, erasure marks. He found nothing. With a bored expression, he returned the documents. Adolfo stepped off at the next station, gripping the satchel tightly against his chest. Inside were 30 forged identity cards for 30 people scheduled to be arrested that very night. Everything had begun 4 years earlier with stains, ordinary stains on clothing. In 1940, 15-year-old Adolfo worked as an apprentice in a dye shop in the small Normandy town of Viere. His family had fallen into poverty after the German invasion. His father, a tailor, had been fired from the factory for being Jewish. When Adolfo saw an advertisement seeking a dyer's apprentice to convert military uniforms into civilian clothes, he answered immediately. His mentor, a chemical engineer, revealed the secrets of removing the most stubborn stains: wine, blood, ink. The teenager became fascinated. He set up a makeshift laboratory in his uncle's house and purchased a used treatise on dye chemistry by Marcelin Berthelot from a flea market. Each evening he mixed solutions in glass beakers, carefully applying drops to fabric marked with ink stains. The stains vanished without a trace. He had no idea then that this simple chemical formula would one day save thousands of lives. In 1941, Adolfo and his family found themselves behind the barbed wire of Drancy internment camp. Drancy was a transit station to the death camps in the east. Every day, trains departed carrying hundreds of prisoners. None returned. His mother was killed by the Nazis. The grief burned more intensely than any chemical he had ever handled. After 3 months, salvation came through Argentine passports. The family was released. But Adolfo understood the fundamental truth. Documents meant the difference between life and death. He hungered for revenge and, for the first time, did not feel powerless. The young man began acts of sabotage, using chemicals to corrode railway equipment and power lines. He monitored the station where trains departed with materials for the Atlantic Wall, passing intelligence to London. On December 22, 1943, the Kaminsky family relocated to Paris. Adolfo found work at a dry cleaning shop. Officially, he simply removed ink stains from clothing. One day, a stranger entered the shop. He introduced himself as a member of an underground organization called La Sixième, the Sixth, part of the General Jewish Union. The conversation was quiet but tense. "Do you know how to work with dyes?" "Yes." "Can you remove ink from paper? Blue Waterman ink. They say it's permanent." Adolfo paused for only a moment. He knew the answer. "Lactic acid. It breaks down the structure of blue dye without damaging the paper." The resistance agent stared at him in astonishment. This problem had stumped experienced technicians for months. "We need someone who can erase Jewish names from documents. Abraham, Isaac, Sarah. Replace them with French names. We don't have much time. The Germans are checking everyone." They brought Adolfo to an underground workshop at 17 Rue de Saint-Père. Neighbors believed artists lived there. The walls were decorated with paintings, brushes, and canvases scattered about. Members of the group watched as the 18-year-old took an authentic French identity card. The owner's name was Isaac Levy, unmistakably Jewish. Adolfo applied a drop of lactic acid to the blue ink. Within seconds, the letters began to fade. Another drop, and they disappeared completely, leaving no trace. Silence filled the room. Then quiet celebration. Mark Hamon, who went by the code name The Penguin, placed his hand on Adolfo's shoulder. "Welcome to the Resistance. You've just become our chief chemist." Adolfo stared at the blank document in his hands, understanding that his life had changed forever. He could produce 30 forged identity cards in 1 hour. If he slept for 1 hour, 30 people would die. The laboratory on Rue des Saint-Père became Adolfo's entire world. The workshop was disguised as an artist's studio, complete with easels and paint supplies to deceive suspicious neighbors. But beneath this facade operated one of the most sophisticated forgery operations in occupied France. The group used whatever tools they could find: kitchen implements, sewing machines for perforating stamps, even a bicycle tire fashioned into a centrifuge for aging documents. Adolfo's skill with lactic acid proved revolutionary. The permanent blue ink used on official documents had been considered impossible to remove by experienced technicians. But Adolfo's formula allowed the resistance to use genuine documents, erasing incriminating information without leaving any evidence of tampering. He would carefully remove names that revealed Jewish origins, Abraham, Esther, Rachel, and replace them with typical French names like André, Elise, or Marie. Most critically, he could completely eliminate the red Juif or Juive stamp that marked Jewish identity cards, the stamp that meant certain deportation. But removing ink was only part of the work. Adolfo quickly learned photogravure and set up additional labs to create entirely new documents from scratch. The Kaminsky laboratory became the primary supplier of forged documents for northern France and the Benelux countries. He and his team produced identity cards, ration cards, birth certificates, marriage certificates, baptismal records, and passports. Every detail had to be perfect: the elaborate handwriting of municipal officials, the precise paper layers, the authentic watermarks, the perfectly aged appearance. A single mistake could cost a life. The most demanding test came when the resistance urgently requested 900 documents. 300 Jewish children in institutions were about to be captured by the Nazis. They needed birth certificates, baptismal certificates, and ration cards, 3 documents per child. The calculation was brutally simple. In 1 hour, Adolfo could produce 30 documents. If he slept for 1 hour, 30 people would die. Adolfo stayed awake. He fought against exhaustion, against the burning in his eyes, against every instinct telling him to rest. He worked through the night and into the next day, his hands moving with mechanical precision, even as his mind grew foggy with fatigue. The documents were completed. The children avoided deportation. By the spring of 1944, Adolfo Kaminsky had become one of the most effective forgers in the French resistance. His documents saved lives daily. Each perfectly crafted card, each expertly erased name, each authentic-looking seal represented another person who would escape the death camps. He never kept exact count of the documents he created, but he estimated thousands passed through his hands during the war. Over the course of the war, historians estimate that Adolfo Kaminsky's forgeries directly saved more than 14,000 Jewish lives. Thousands of children and adults escaped deportation to concentration camps. Many were able to flee Nazi-occupied territories entirely, reaching safe havens with documents Adolfo had created in his secret laboratory. He was never arrested. He worked in the shadows, his identity hidden, his activities known only to a small circle of resistance members. When Allied forces liberated Paris in August 1944, Adolfo stood among the crowds celebrating freedom. Shortly afterward, French military intelligence recruited him to forge documents for spies operating behind enemy lines as fighting continued across Europe. Everything had started with a simple question in a dry cleaning shop. Can you remove ink from paper? The answer, lactic acid, had seemed insignificant at the time. But that single chemical formula, combined with one young man's determination never to feel powerless again, had changed the fate of thousands. December 12, 1943, 11:47 p.m. The knock came in 3 sharp raps. The signal. Adolfo looked up from his workbench where a half-finished identity card lay drying under lamplight. Mark Heyman pushed through the door, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. He wasn't alone. A woman followed him inside, her coat soaked through from the December rain. She was perhaps 40, though the lines around her eyes suggested someone who had aged a decade in the past 3 years. She gripped a canvas bag against her chest, like it contained something precious or fragile. "This is Madame Rousseau," Mark said, pulling the blackout curtains closed. "She runs the children's home in Neuilly." Adolfo set down his brush. "How many?" The woman's voice came out barely above a whisper. 300. The number hung in the air like smoke. 300 children. Adolfo did the calculation automatically. 900 documents, birth certificates, baptismal records, ration cards, 3 for each child. "When?" he asked. "Thursday morning. The Gestapo scheduled the raid for dawn." Her hands trembled as she opened the bag and pulled out a crumpled list. "These are their real names. Abraham, Isaac, Rachel, Esther." Her voice broke. "Their children. The oldest is 14. The youngest—" She stopped, unable to continue. Adolfo took the list. 47 pages of names written in careful handwriting, each entry representing a life that would end in a cattle car if he failed. He looked at the wall clock. 11:52 p.m. Thursday dawn was roughly 50 hours away. Mark leaned against the workbench. "We need the documents by Wednesday midnight. The distribution network needs time to get them to—" "Wednesday midnight," Adolfo repeated. 36 hours. He calculated again. 900 documents divided by 36 hours meant 25 documents per hour. He could manage 30 per hour when working at full speed, but only for short bursts. Sustained over 36 hours, with no sleep, no breaks. "It's impossible," Mark said quietly, reading his expression. "We'll need to contact the other workshops, distribute the workload." "No." Adolfo's voice cut through the room. "Distribution takes time. Coordination takes time. We don't have time." He turned to Madame Rousseau. "Do you have photographs?" She reached back into the bag and produced 3 thick envelopes. "Every child, taken last month for—" She stopped. They had been taken for deportation records. Now they would become tools of salvation. December 13th, 1943, 12:30 a.m. Adolfo spread the photographs across the work table. 300 faces stared up at him. Children with dark eyes and uncertain smiles, wearing their best clothes for the camera. A boy of perhaps 8 with a gap between his front teeth. Twin girls who looked no older than 6, holding hands. A teenager trying to look brave. He picked up the first photo. David Abramowitsch, age 11. The boy had his mother's nose, his father's serious expression. By morning, David Abramowitsch would cease to exist. In his place would be André Moreau, Catholic boy from Burgundy, complete with papers proving he'd been baptized at Saint-Étienne Church in 1932. Mark appeared at his shoulder with 2 other members of the team, Henri and Sophie, both experienced in document work. "We can help with the—" "I need you to steal blank forms," Adolfo interrupted. He was already sketching out the workflow in his mind, organizing tasks by priority and efficiency. Birth certificates from Neuilly, baptismal records from 3 different parishes, Saint-Étienne, Notre-Dame de Lorette, and Sacré-Cœur. "We need variety, or the pattern will show." Henri whistled low. The prefecture closes at 5. The churches are locked at night. You're asking us to break into... I'm asking you to save 300 lives. Adolfo met his eyes. Can you do it? Henri exchanged a glance with Sophie. She nodded once. We'll have the blanks by noon. Not good enough. I need them by 8 a.m. Adolfo was already pulling out his chemistry supplies, bottles of lactic acid, brushes, mixing compounds. Every hour delays me by 25 documents. Every document might be the difference between a child living or dying. Sophie touched his arm gently. You can't work for 36 hours straight. It's physically... In 1 hour, I produce 30 documents. The formula had become his mantra, the equation that governed everything. If I sleep 1 hour, 30 people die, 30 children. The room fell silent. Even Mark, who had argued with him before about rest, said nothing. 8 a.m., Adolfo repeated. Bring the blank forms at 8 a.m. December 13th, 1943. 8:17 a.m. Henri burst through the door with Sophie close behind, both breathless and carrying leather portfolios. We got them, Henri gasped. 20 birth certificates from Neuilly, 40 baptismal records from Notre Dame. The priest keeps copies in an unlocked cabinet, the fool, and 15 from Sacré-Cœur. It's not enough, Adolfo said without looking up. He'd spent the past 7 hours preparing, organizing photographs, creating a master list of new identities with randomized birth dates and parishes, mixing inks to match official colors. We need at least 200 blanks. 300 is better. Sophie set down her portfolio. Then we go back tonight. But you... She stopped, staring at him. Adolfo, when did you last sleep? Friday. 3 days ago. He could feel the exhaustion like weight pressing down on his shoulders, but his hands remained steady. That was all that mattered. Start aging these forms. Use the burial soil from the garden. Rub gently along the edges. They need to look 2 years old, maybe 3. Mark entered carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and coffee. Eat something. No time. You'll collapse. Then I'll collapse after I finish. Adolfo picked up the first photograph, the gap-toothed 8-year-old, David Abramovich. He selected a blank birth certificate and began the transformation. The child's new name would be Pierre Dubois, born March 15, 1935, in Lyon, son of Jean Dubois and Marie Laurent, both deceased. Orphaned children raised questions but not suspicion. His pen moved across the form with practiced precision. The handwriting had to match the registrar's style, slightly slanted with distinctive loops on the capital letters. He'd studied hundreds of authentic certificates, memorizing the quirks of different municipal officials. This one supposedly came from Lyon's 3rd arrondissement, where Registrar Beaumont favored heavy pressure on downstrokes and elegant serifs. Behind him, Sophie and Henri worked on aging the documents. The smell of damp soil mixed with the chemical tang of Adolfo's inks. Mark stood by the window watching the street for any sign of surveillance. The first document took 12 minutes. Too slow. Adolfo forced himself to work faster without sacrificing accuracy. The second took 10 minutes, the third, 9. By the time he'd completed the 10th birth certificate, he'd found his rhythm, 8 minutes per document if nothing went wrong. We have a problem, Henri called out. He held up a baptismal certificate, frowning. The parish seal from Notre Dame. It's changed. Look at the date. They started using a new stamp in October. These blanks are from before the change. Adolfo's stomach dropped. A mismatched seal would be instantly recognizable to any inspector who knew the parishes. Show me. Henri produced 2 certificates side by side, one authentic from September, another from November. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. The October seal had sharper details, a slightly different font on the encircling text. We can't use the September blanks for recent baptisms, Adolfo said, thinking quickly. Date them all before October. Make the children older converts. Families that moved to Paris recently had their children baptized after arriving. That creates another problem, Sophie interjected. If a 12-year-old was only baptized last month, why the delay? It raises questions. Then we make them refugees. The solution came to him, fully formed. Families fleeing the free zone after the German occupation in November recently arrived seeking baptism for their children at new parishes. It's plausible, it's documented, it won't raise flags. Mark nodded slowly. It works, but it means rewriting the backstories for half the children. Then rewrite them. Adolfo was already back at his workbench, finishing Pierre Dubois' birth certificate. The seal came next, pressed carefully into red wax, then dusted with powder to dull the shine. 2 bright wax screamed forgery to experienced eyes. December 13th, 1943. 6:43 p.m., 147 documents completed. Adolfo's hand cramped around the pen. He flexed his fingers, willing feeling back into them. His eyes burned from hours of close work under lamplight. The photographs were starting to blur together, the children's faces merging into a single, desperate plea. Sophie appeared at his elbow with soup. "You need to eat." "Put it there." He gestured vaguely without looking up. The current document was a ration card for Simone Katz, now known as Marguerite Fontaine. The ration cards were the most dangerous. They required official stamps that changed monthly, serial numbers that had to fall within valid ranges, and signatures from distribution centers that varied by arrondissement. He'd created a reference chart covering the entire left wall, authentic ration cards from 12 different districts, organized by month and noting every variation in format, numbering and stamps. One wrong detail and the forgery would fail at the first inspection. The soup sat untouched as he worked through the next card, then the next. His world had contracted to the 10-inch square of workspace directly in front of him. Document, photograph, pen, stamp, seal. Document, photograph, pen, stamp, seal. The rhythm was meditative, almost hypnotic. "Adolfo," Mark's voice came from somewhere distant. "You made a mistake." The words cut through his concentration like a knife. Adolfo looked up, blinking. Mark held a birth certificate, one of the recent ones. "The date. You wrote 1943 instead of 1934. The child would be 0 years old." Horror washed through him. He grabbed the certificate, seeing the error immediately. His hand had written 1943 automatically, his exhausted brain failing to correct the date to match the child's supposed age. "How many others?" His voice came out harsh. Mark sorted through the completed stack. "Just this one, as far as I can see, but check them all, every single document." Adolfo's hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding through exhaustion. One mistake like that at a checkpoint meant a dead child. Sophie Henri, help him. Check every date, every name, every number. He looked at the clock. 6:51 p.m., 29 hours left, 753 documents remaining, and now he couldn't trust his own work. "You need to sleep," Mark said quietly. "Just 2 hours. We'll wake you." "In 2 hours, 60 children die." "In 0 hours, you make mistakes that kill them anyway." Mark's voice was hard now, insistent. "You're no good to anyone if you can't tell 1943 from 1934. Adolfo stared at the ruined certificate, at the photograph of the girl it was supposed to save, Rebecca Stein, age 9, with braids and a shy smile, soon to be Marguerite Fontaine, if he didn't fail her. 1 hour, he said finally. "Wake me in exactly 1 hour." He stumbled to the cot in the corner and collapsed onto it fully clothed. Sleep dragged him under like drowning. December 13th, 1943, 8:04 p.m. Mark shook him awake. There were 3 more errors. We caught them all. The documents are fixed. Adolfo pushed himself upright, his head pounding. 1 hour of sleep had somehow made the exhaustion worse, his body now aware of what it was being denied. "Show me the errors." Mark handed him the corrected documents. All dating mistakes, his tired brain transposing numbers, writing current dates instead of backdated ones. They would have been instant death sentences. "Henri and Sophie are checking every document going forward," Mark said. "You focus on production. We'll catch the mistakes." It was an admission that Adolfo could no longer be trusted to work alone. The thought filled him with shame and relief in equal measure. How many done? 192, 708 to go. 26 hours remaining, 27 documents per hour. Still possible, but only barely. Adolfo returned to his workstation. The next photograph showed twin boys, identical down to matching gaps in their smiles. Benjamin and Samuel Levy, age 7. They would become Jean and Paul Mercier, sons of a railway worker killed in a bombing raid. He began creating Jean's birth certificate, forcing his hand to move with deliberate care. Each letter formed slowly, checked twice before moving to the next. The work pace dropped to 10 minutes per document, then 12. Sophie and Henri maintained quality control, their eagle eyes catching errors before documents entered the finished stack. The night stretched on. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m., 2, 3. The world outside the blackout curtains remained dark and cold. Inside the workshop, lamplight created islands of yellow warmth where 3 people fought time itself. At 4:17 a.m., Adolfo's hand slipped. A line of ink splattered across a baptismal certificate. Father Gerard's signature ruined, the form unusable. Henri had to return to Notre Dame to steal another blank, risking a second break-in at a church where they'd already pressed their luck once. At 6:33 a.m., Sophie discovered that they'd run out of red wax for parish seals. Mark spent 2 hours finding a shop that would open early, buying wax in cash from a suspicious shopkeeper who asked too many questions. At 11:12 a.m., a patrol of French police walked past the building. Everyone froze, barely breathing, until the footsteps faded down the street. December 14th, 1943, 9:17 p.m., 831 documents completed, 69 remaining, 15 hours until the deadline. Adolfo's vision had narrowed to a tunnel. The photographs were just shapes now, dark spots for eyes, lighter spots for faces. His hand moved on autopilot, muscle memory guiding the pen through signatures he'd forged 1,000 times. Sophie and Henri worked beside him in silence, all pretense of rest abandoned. This was the final push. At 11:47 p.m., they finished the birth certificates. All 300 checked and rechecked and checked again. At 2:23 a.m., the baptismal records were complete. 300 Catholic children who had never set foot in a church now had documented proof of their faith. At 5:38 a.m., with the first hints of dawn starting to gray, the blackout curtains, Adolfo completed the final ration card. Number 900. He set down his pen and stared at it, a simple piece of paper covered in ink and stamps and lies. This one belonged to Leah Rosenbaum, now called Louise Girard, age 6. Her photograph showed a serious child with enormous eyes. "It's done," he said. His voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Mark gathered the documents with trembling hands. "The couriers are waiting. They'll have these distributed by dawn." Sophie touched Adolfo's shoulder. "You did it. You saved them." He wanted to feel relief or triumph or joy. Instead, he felt only a vast, echoing emptiness. How do we know? The question came out barely above a whisper. How do we know it worked? No one had an answer. December 16th, 1943. 2:14 p.m. Adolfo was asleep, truly asleep for the first time in 4 days, when Mark burst into the workshop. "Wake up, Adolfo, wake up!" He jerked upright, heart racing. "What happened? Did the raid—" "The children are safe." Mark's face split into a grin. "All of them. The Gestapo came at dawn Thursday like Madame Rousseau said. They searched the home for 3 hours, checked every document, every child, found nothing. 300 Catholic orphans with perfect papers. They left empty-handed." The news took a moment to penetrate the fog of Adolfo's exhausted brain. 300 children, 900 documents, all successful, not one failure. Madame Rousseau sent this. Mark held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a child's drawing, crude crayon on newsprint, showing a house and stick figures holding hands. At the bottom, in careful block letters, "Merci." Adolfo stared at the drawing, at those 5 letters that represented 300 lives continuing past Thursday dawn. His hands started to shake, then his shoulders, then his entire body, great shuddering waves of relief and exhaustion, and something that might have been tears if he'd had any moisture left to spare. Sophie wrapped a blanket around him. Henri pressed a cup of real coffee, actual coffee, not the ersatz garbage, into his hands. Mark sat down beside him, saying nothing, just present. Outside, the December rain had stopped. Somewhere in Paris, 300 children with new names and new papers were living past their scheduled execution date. They would grow up, have families, tell stories about the war. Most would never know the name Adolfo Kaminsky or the 36 hours that saved their lives. But he would know. Every time he looked at that crayon drawing, he would know. He had refused to sleep and 30 children hadn't died. He had refused to sleep again and 30 more survived. 60, 90, 120. The mathematics of survival, calculated in hours of wakefulness, traded for documents of life. "What's next?" he asked finally. Mark pulled out another list. Adults this time. Resistance fighters who need new identities. 50 documents by next week. Adolfo nodded and set down his coffee. His hands had stopped shaking. The work was never finished. There would always be another list, another deadline, another race against time and death. He picked up his pen. August 23, 1944, 3:42 p.m. The sound of distant artillery rolled through Paris like thunder. Adolfo stood at the window of the workshop on Rue des Saints-Pères, watching smoke rise from the direction of the Seine. After 4 years of occupation, the city was finally fighting back. Behind him, Mark fed documents into the cast-iron stove. Blank forms, reference samples, master lists. Everything that could identify the people they'd saved had to burn. The workshop that had saved thousands would vanish as if it had never existed. "How many people?" Adolfo asked without turning from the window. Mark was silent for a long moment. 14,000, maybe more. 14,000 lives. The number should have meant something. Triumph, vindication, purpose fulfilled. Instead, Adolfo felt only hollowness. He was 21 years old. He'd spent 4 years barely sleeping, forever haunted by the mathematics of survival. 30 documents per hour. 1 hour of sleep equals 30 deaths. Now it was over, and he didn't know who he was without it. "French intelligence wants to see you," Mark said. "They need forgers for German documents, papers for agents operating behind enemy lines." He paused. "I told them you'd do it." "You told them because I know you." Mark's voice was hard, almost angry. "You can't stop. Even if the war ends tomorrow, you'll find someone else who needs saving. It's who you are now." The words landed like punches. Adolfo wanted to deny them, but looking at Mark's face, he saw the truth reflected there. 4 years of watching Adolfo destroy himself had left its mark on both of them. The work matters, Adolfo said finally. The work is killing you. Mark gestured at him. You're 21. You look 40. When did you last eat a full meal? Sleep through the night? Do anything that wasn't work? When the war ends, the war will never end for you. Mark's voice softened. There will always be another crisis, another person who needs saving. I'm not saying don't take the intelligence job. I'm saying decide if this is the only life you want to live. He pulled a bottle of wine from his coat. Real wine, not occupation swill. The city is free. We won. Give yourself 3 days before you disappear into the next workshop. 3 days to remember what we were fighting for. Mark left the bottle on the workbench and walked out. Adolfo stood alone in the empty workshop, staring at a photograph he'd kept when all the others burned. Rebecca Stein, age 9, who became Marguerite Fontaine. Gap-toothed smile, enormous eyes that looked directly at the camera. He'd kept her photo because he needed to remember. Every document had a face, a name, a life attached to it. But he didn't know if she was still alive. The documents got her past December 1943. What about January, February? Every month was another checkpoint, another chance for discovery. He'd given her a chance, nothing more. Mark's words echoed in the empty room. Learn to be human again before you forget how. 3 days. Could he do that? Could he stop calculating, stop working, stop being the equation he'd turned himself into? He picked up the wine bottle and left the workshop for the last time. August 26, 1944. 7:14 a.m. Adolfo woke to sunlight streaming through a window. He'd slept 12 hours in Henri's spare room. 12 hours that meant 360 documents unmade, 360 potential deaths if those documents were needed. The familiar guilt twisted in his stomach. He forced himself to breathe. 3 days to be human. The work would wait. He dressed and went outside. Paris had transformed. Swastikas and German signs were gone, replaced by tricolor flags hanging from every balcony. People filled the streets, not hurrying to forced labor, but walking freely, celebrating simply by existing in their own city again. Adolfo walked without destination, letting the crowds carry him. Past the Sorbonne, where he'd first met the resistance. Past churches whose seals he'd forged on 10,000 baptismal certificates. Past the prefecture where Henri had stolen blank forms 100 times. Near the Luxembourg Gardens, a café had tables spilling onto the sidewalk. A sign proclaimed Ouvert, Café Réel, serving real coffee for the first time in 4 years. Adolfo found a seat and ordered a cup. When it arrived, the smell alone nearly made him cry. He took a sip and tasted a world he'd almost forgotten existed. Is this seat taken? A woman, perhaps 25, with dark hair and a sketchbook under one arm. She carried herself with the cautious confidence of someone relearning how to occupy space freely. It's free, Adolfo said. She sat, ordered coffee, then opened her sketchbook and began drawing the café, the tables, the crowd, the flags. Quick, confident lines. You're good, he said. I'm practicing. 4 years of drawing propaganda posters for the Germans. She glanced at him. Now I get to draw what I want again. She added shading to a flag. What did you do during the war? The casual question strangers ask while sharing a table. But Adolfo had no answer. What had he done? Saved 14,000 lives, destroyed his health, forgot how to be a person. Paperwork, he said finally. A lot of paperwork. She laughed. Sounds boring. It was necessary. She studied him more carefully, and he saw the moment she recognized something in his face. The haunted look that marked everyone who'd survived occupation by doing unspeakable things. Necessary work is still work, she said quietly. The war's over. Time to find unnecessary things again. Like drawing? Like drawing, like coffee, like sitting in the sun and talking to strangers. She closed her sketchbook. I'm Elise. Adolfo. They talked about nothing important, the weather, where to find real bread, her dream of studying at the École des Beaux-Arts. Elise had spent the war in a print shop, creating German propaganda by day and resistance leaflets by night. She talked about color theory, about the difference between art and advertising, about reclaiming her craft. Adolfo listened and discovered something strange. For 20 minutes he hadn't calculated anything, hadn't thought about documents or deadlines or the mathematics of survival. He'd just existed, like a normal person having a normal conversation. It felt alien and terrifying and somehow wonderful. I come most mornings to draw, Elise said eventually. Maybe I'll see you again? Maybe, Adolfo said, and meant it. After she left, he ordered another coffee and sat in the sunlight, watching Paris remember how to be alive. Maybe being human was nothing more than this, sitting in a cafe, drinking real coffee, talking to strangers about unnecessary things. Maybe survival meant more than just staying alive. August 27, 1944. 2:33 p.m. Adolfo returned to the cafe. Elise was there, sketching a child feeding pigeons. She smiled when she saw him. Back again? The coffee's good. Liar, it's terrible. She gestured to the empty seat. But it's ours. They talked for 2 hours about the liberation, about rebuilding, about what comes after war. Elise asked no questions about his work, and he asked none about hers. They existed in the present tense, two people who'd survived occupation, sitting in sunlight, pretending the world was normal. When he left, Elise handed him something, a small sketch she'd done while they talked. It showed the cafe from her perspective, tables, flags, pigeons, and in the corner, barely outlined, a man sitting alone with a coffee cup, looking toward the street. So you remember, she said, that you were here, that you existed as more than work. Adolfo carried the sketch back to Henri's apartment and placed it next to Rebecca Stein's photograph. 2 pieces of paper, one representing everyone he'd saved, one representing the person he might become if he chose differently. August 28, 1944, 8:47 p.m. Tomorrow the intelligence work began. New workshop, German documents, agents behind enemy lines, higher stakes, greater pressure, less margin for error. The work would consume him again. He knew this with absolute certainty. But tonight he sat in Henri's apartment with the sketch and the photograph, thinking about Mark's question. Is this the only life you want to live? The answer should have been simple. People needed him. His skills saved lives. How could he choose comfort over necessity? But Elise's sketch reminded him of something he'd forgotten. He was more than an equation, more than a tool for producing documents. Somewhere beneath 4 years of exhaustion and guilt and mathematics, Adolfo Kaminsky still existed. A person who could sit in cafes, talk about unnecessary things, maybe even draw his own pictures someday. He couldn't abandon the work. The war was moving east and people were dying. But maybe, just maybe, he could do the work differently. Sleep occasionally, eat real meals, visit cafes on Sunday mornings. Remember that the people he saved had faces, and so did he. The mathematics hadn't changed. 1 hour of his time could still mean 30 lives saved or lost. But Mark was right about one thing. If he burned out completely, if he erased himself entirely, then eventually there would be nothing left to give. And then everyone would lose. Adolfo pulled out a pen and paper. For the first time in 4 years, he wrote something that wasn't a forged document, just a note, 4 lines. Elise, I'll be at the cafe Sunday morning. If you're there, I'd like to talk about unnecessary things. He would deliver it tomorrow before reporting to intelligence. Then he would set up the new workshop, create documents for agents infiltrating Germany, work until exhaustion threatened, then, for the first time, stop. Sleep. returned Sunday morning to a cafe where someone knew him as more than a forger. It wasn't much, but it was something. He looked at Rebecca Stein's photograph one final time. Gap-toothed smile, enormous eyes, 9 years old. She'd be 10 now if she'd survived, maybe 11. Living under a false name, perhaps never knowing that a boy barely older than her had stayed awake for 36 hours to save her life. The work had cost him everything, his health, his youth, any chance at a normal life. But somewhere in Paris or Lyon or Brussels or beyond, 300 children from that December night were alive. 14,000 people walked streets they might never have seen. Most would never know his name, but they lived. Adolfo folded the note to Elise and placed it in his pocket. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight, and maybe Sunday, and maybe the Sunday after that, he would remember what it felt like to be human. The mathematics still demanded everything, but perhaps he could give everything while keeping something for himself. Perhaps that was the only way to survive, saving others. Epilogue. Adolfo Kaminsky worked as a forger for nearly 30 years after the liberation of Paris. He created documents for French intelligence, Algerian independence fighters, anti-apartheid activists, draft resistors, and refugees from dictatorships across 3 continents. He worked into his 70s creating papers for anyone fighting oppression who needed to cross a border guarded by people who wanted them dead. When asked why he never stopped, he gave the same answer. In 1 hour, I could make 30 documents. If I slept 1 hour, 30 people would die. He did eventually marry a woman he met at a cafe near Luxembourg Gardens. They had children, grandchildren. He became a photographer, an artist. He learned to exist as more than the work, though the work never truly ended. Adolfo Kaminsky died in Paris in 2023 at age 97. Historians estimate his forgeries directly saved more than 14,000 lives during World War II alone, with thousands more saved in the decades that followed. Most never knew his name, but they lived. And for Adolfo Kaminsky, that was always enough.